And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Stacy Jones, and I'm from the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is part of our ongoing series on supporting transformation and community life engagement outcomes for people with developmental disabilities in Minnesota. This is brought to you as part of the Minnesota Transformation Initiative, or MTI, which I'll talk about in another second. The recording of today's presentation, along with any materials, will be forwarded to everyone that's registered by the end of the week. And I just wanted to get that out of the way because I know it's one of the frequently asked questions throughout the webinar. As a quick reminder, again, if this is your first time joining in with us, I want to just take a second to tell you about the Minnesota Transformation Initiative and what it is. It's designed to support provider organizations to move away from supporting employment that pays sub-minimum wage and to really expand and increase competitive integrated employment and community life engagement outcomes. And this project is funded by the Minnesota DHS, and we have a few partners in this project, including Institute for Community Integration at the University of Minnesota, as well as ICI UMass Boston, Strengths at Work LLC, the Arc of Minnesota, and Quillo. And if you would like to read more about MTI, or you've never heard of it and you want to just figure out what it is, or if you want to access any of the past recorded trainings that we've put on over the last year, you can go to the website that's noted at the bottom of your screen, and we'll also pop that link in the chat box so that you can access it. And you can access all of the resources and tools at the website. So now that we've gotten that housekeeping out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest presenters for today. Tim Vogt is the Learning Network Director. Bridget Vogt is the Community Builder Coordinator, and they're both with Starfire Council, which is located in Cincinnati, Ohio. Tim and Bridget have over 50 years of combined experience working with people with disabilities and over 40 years of management, fundraising, and coordinating experience. They've spent their careers studying and innovating around person-centered design and social connections for people with disabilities and their families. And really the reason we invited them to join us today, Tim and Bridget both led Starfire through a transformation from more segregated disability programming to inclusive community programming. And most recently, they've built Starfire's Family Network, Learning Network, and Neighbor Network, leading creative collaborations with their communities. And we reached out to Starfire in particular because they are one of the organizations that was part of the initial work at ICI UMass that eventually led to the Community Life Engagement Toolkit and the Community Life Engagement Guideposts. And we thought that it would be really impactful for Tim and Bridget to share their story as an example of what service delivery looks like or could look like on the other side of transformation and how they got there. And if you aren't familiar with the toolkit or the guideposts that I just mentioned, again, I would encourage you after this to go to the MTI site. We'll also, again, pop some of those resources in the chat box. We also did a previous webinar back in May where we walked through each of the guideposts to give a little bit more context. So that's it for me for now. I am going to pass things over to Tim and Bridget. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy. Bridget, that was a cute picture of you. Y'all, we should just say we are married. And so that's okay for me to say that. And if you see Bridget winking, it's typically going to be at me. We've been together for...
But yeah.
We have worked at Starfire for 23 years. 23 wonderful years. It's been hard work, though, and good work. And so we are here. I think in particular, I want to start with thanking y'all. Being in the space that we are in our work and in the times of our work is an incredible honor. We're in kind of a crossroads, right? The people that retired over the last 20 years, I'm always jealous of them, right? They didn't have to go through a lot of the transformation and innovation that we've had to go through. And so I just really appreciate you all for being in the thick of that. And we also think that we need you. in your best selves and your most creative selves. And now more than ever in our field and in our world. So we think this is like kind of like more, and we'll talk about this, but we think this is good for our world as well as for our work, but you all know that. We just want to start by telling you, we've been at it too. So this is Starfire. We have run over the last 20 years outings for all kinds of people with disabilities, Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy, and you name it. That's me dressed as Santa Claus at a dance for about 150 people with disabilities. Bridge ran hundreds of outings every month and day programs. We did end up getting about $4 million that we raised for a brand new building, and we were winning awards for innovation, and the Ohio State Nonprofit Association gave us trophies for our great work in our day program, and we felt pretty good about ourselves. So we were successful. We had a fleet of vans. Gosh, how many do we have? Like 7 or 8. We gave them all names. We had a key checkout system. We had a big building. You know, it was first space was like 9,000 square feet. And then we expanded our day programs and we got up to like 18,000 square feet in a 30,000 square foot building. We have plans to grow it. So we've been at it. And today we kind of want to give you a little bit of a taste of the 3 phases of work that we did around that. So we'll tell you more, but I'm going to turn it over to Bridge here for a second to get us in the proper space. All you, Bridge.
Okay, so we at Starfire, one, we just want to appreciate the fact that there is a lot of wisdom here in this crowd. And one of the traditions we have is just to make sure everybody gets a chance to kind of speak and to think on some things. So we want to start, we're going to do a small groups of breakout here. And we want to talk, most of what you'll hear about today is all about the connections and the relationships we're hoping for in the world and for people with disabilities. And we have a lot of wisdom. We've had a lot of life experiences on our own. So the question for you guys to talk through is just to talk with a couple people. How did you meet one of your closest friends? Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys this option to join those rooms.
And remind them this is being recorded, so don't say anything illegal about how you met your friends, okay? If that is true, just keep it to yourself.
So join those, you'll have a few minutes to talk through with each other.
Everybody, if you're just now joining, we're going to go into breakout groups and just talk about a question. How did you meet a close friend?
And if you're having
Just a few
trouble
minutes.
knowing how to connect in those small groups, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know. You should see a pop-up on your screen, and if you don't, it may be closed in the background. But we see lots of people that have not connected.
Sometimes those buttons are hidden. There's this one button that, like, when the breakout rooms close, I want to hit it, but it means close all rooms or something.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to hit that. Don't hit that. It's the most tempting button ever. Zoom's got to have a different way of showing that button.
I know I'm not in a small group, but I also met my husband at work, working in a very traditional day program. So your story resonates very much with me.
Well, Bridget was the head coach of a basketball team for the Special Olympics, and I was her assistant coach. That's when we first officially worked together. We worked at the same organization, but then I was your assistant coach.
That's true.
So
the age-old story.
Yeah. Well, and too, Stacy, it should be noted that the year after Bridget left to go volunteer at a respite program in Appalachia, I took that team to the Final Four in the state of Ohio. So
I wonder if, do you all have the ability on your end to put people in their rooms? Because I don't seem to on
Gonna
my
ask if
end.
somebody is Amy doing, I feel like somebody is moving. I am not doing things and things are happening.
I'm
So I
not
wasn't sure
either.
if somebody
that's
else was.
good.
I was like, oh, things are happening here that I'm not
And we
doing.
have somebody saying there's no one in the room. I just don't have the ability to make them go.
You can add them to another room if that's that person. Put them in. If it's a group of 4 or something, that's fine too. Sometimes what happens is people are driving or they are kind of stepped away for a second and they don't get the join notification, which is cool. But sometimes they just want to stay in a room with us because they're like, these people are awesome.
Well, that's the case
people.
for me, for sure. So,
Oh, thanks, Sherry. Appreciate that.
and I'm sorry, I'm about to get in a
I
car,
think I
which
just
is why I
messed
did
up and
not
added
join.
Tim.
I'm not joining a room, Stacy. Forget you.
Yeah, that was an accident. I was randomly going down my list here.
I'm gonna go ahead and close the rooms and they'll just get that minute warning.
Cool. Just when we figured it out, right?
I know, like, oh, well, you'll have a quick conversation. So everybody's got 30 seconds before they're forced to be back in here. A countdown to sneak in the last bits of a good conversation. Okay, we're all trickling back in from that little conversation. Hope it was fun. I don't know if you had a lot of time. Some breakouts were a little emptier than others. That's okay. Hopefully got to a chance to talk with some people. We want to hear a little bit about maybe some of the greatest hits, or if there were things that you guys noticed in common amongst how you all met these friends. And we're going to ask that you do it a certain way. So at Starfire, we have the practice of not just repeating what we said ourselves, because we all know what a genius you are. I am, and I should be saying, but it's a chance to lift up somebody else's voice and what you heard someone else say. And it's just a chance. We all need to know that somebody listened and heard us. That's a great feeling. But also the importance to our work with people with disabilities. We are often in the spaces and places where our role is to lift up their voice and include them in the conversation. So we just kind of keep that as a practice in mind. So give us what you heard. If you're willing to come off mute and say it, if you'd rather put it in the chat, you can do that as well. And we'll kind of read what you guys heard. If something struck you, you really liked what somebody said, or if there was a commonalities that you had.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I was in my group with Mary W. and Michael S. And both Mary and Michael met their oldest friends in school, in public school. Michael actually in kindergarten, so a very long time friend. Those are Michael's words, not mine. And I have similar experiences to both Mary and Michael, that I met my 2 oldest friends in school.
Yeah. Those old friendships, you can't, I don't know. There's quotes galore about old friendships and how long they go back. But meeting people in school, we cheated in the big group, like here, those that didn't leave. And we talked about work And so just one reality is where we spend our time and where we are, that's where you meet some people, right? So if you're at school every day, it would make sense that you would hopefully meet somebody and have that friendship. So we have that too. Daily work, that's what Gail said, and recreation and leisure interests. So finding those sort of, Gail pointed out some of them, what do you do after work? And what do you do when you're not in those spaces? And that kind of good thing. Okay.
We had someone in our group that talks about the power of play. So playing, whether it's sports, different, like even as an, adult leagues, and getting out into those and being able to build friendships that way. And then on the other end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
it was, being from a small town, and she said not a lot of options, but you kind of foster that. She had a close friendship that is still her best friend to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't discount how we spend our free time, right? That play and enjoyment of things, for sure. And even the enjoyment of watching other people, your kids, somebody put that, like, again, where you're spending your time. If you're on a sideline or if you're waiting at a pickup, sitting outside a dance studio, you strike up a conversation and who knows where that'll lead. So you guys, more good stuff to come, but Tim, I'll let you get started getting into more of the.
Well, I was just going to say, Elle just put in the chat that Tony met her best friend when her friend fell on her bike in front of her house, and then ran into one another later at the other robotics class. But seriously, like that's critical. We could meet each other in trouble, right? And we could be there. There's this great quote, and it's Aristotle, which is like some Greek ancestor, right? And he said that people create friendships by eating a pound of salt together. Okay, that's not healthy. Don't go home and eat a pound of salt, right? But the point was, over a lifetime, over many meals together, we would have eaten a pound of salt, which I think is so important to think about. If you're going to be friends from kindergarten, you're going to have to eat a lot of salt together. It's going to have to be week by week, month by month, year by year, right? And he said at the back half of that quote is, we have to keep living up to the responsibility of friendship. Meaning we got to show up for each other. We got to be there, even when it's tough to be friends. Did anybody have a friend that they're like, it's kind of tough being this person's friend sometimes? Or people have tough times being our friends, right? If we have sad times or tough times. So we have to keep showing up for each other. So anyway, yeah. We kind of noticed that question because what we're creating was, y'all said, look, people meet at school, they meet in neighborhoods in small towns, they meet playing on sports teams together, they meet working at the same place together. And that launches kind of the story. And that's the story we were launching at Starfire, except for the problem was that just limited the universe of relationships, right? So we're rocking and rolling. We're offering awesome outings and day programs. We're billing Medicaid $1 million a year. We're getting awards. We're being righteous social workers. People are saying, you have the patience of a saint. We're like, oh, don't say that. Yes, but go ahead and say it. We're patting ourselves on the back. We're getting vans and buildings and recognition. And this was our first big interruption. This is some data from just a survey of 51 people here in Ohio. So Starfire is located in Southwest Ohio, Cincinnati. And Bridget and I live directly across the river. We can see downtown Cincinnati from our house. So we live in Kentucky, all right? So we're able to kind of cross both states a little bit. But as we're working at Starfire, we go to this presentation. This dude says, look, I interviewed 51 people with disabilities. His name's Jack Peeler. He's been studying inclusion for his whole life, 50 years in the field. And Jack says, out of the 51 people with disabilities that we interviewed, this was in 1990, he says, they had these numbers. On average, each person had 8 family members. On average, each person had 25 paid people in their lives. These are Starfire workers, Special Olympics coaches, group home workers, workshop workers, day program workers, therapists, doctors, you name it, special ed teachers, whatever. On average, each person had 2 friends without a disability and 3 other citizens without a disability. And on average, each of the 51 people had 68 other people with disabilities in their lives. Okay. So Jack's telling this story about this survey, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is us. Because then he brings up this question that's at the bottom of your screen. 9 of the 51 people had only paid human services professionals and people with disabilities in their circles. And that meant that the family had passed on, that there wasn't a group of citizens that was in this person's life. And I remember when I heard that line, I was sitting next to a mother of a person with a disability who was on our board of trustees. And Jack says, you know, parents are always asking who's going to be in my child's life when I'm not there. And I leaned over to this mom and I said, do you have that question? Because I'd never heard that before. I thought we were the answer. I thought all of our services were just awesome. She says, I pray every day that I can live to be 100 and that my son dies the day before I do. And at that moment, it just kind of hit me that we had not created an answer outside of our building, that we were actually continuing to miss the question that was on that mom's heart. And so this brought a ton of really uncomfortable questions to us. One was, is this a life I would want? And has anything changed? So as we go back through this, this is literally 30 years after Jack did this research. Do I want a life that is got a bunch of cool people that want to help me, but are paid to be in my life and are in and out of my life? And so the reality was Starfire was consistent, but Bridget and I have worked there 23 years, and there are over 200 other employees that have worked there at that time, and they are not there anymore. So they're all great people. We background checked them, we hired them, we trained them. They were wonderful. Some of them weren't, but they left. And so it creates this temporary kind of structure, and it's not bad. It's just the reality is that the biggest support system of our services are constantly rotating. And then there's not this permanence with neighborhood and friendship. So you think about a friendship from kindergarten, that's a permanent part of your life. You think about meeting that person in their bike rec and then meeting them later on at the aerobics class, that person becomes a permanent part of your life, right? And so we weren't creating that for people with disabilities. And lastly, we were just creating a place where it was constant problems for people. They were reflected by their disability, not by their strengths. So we're really challenged by that. And nothing had changed, and kind of still hasn't. We've done some pretty good work, but we haven't necessarily answered this big question. And I don't think that it's because we haven't tried, but it's still something that we want to bring up over and over. And I think the biggest thing that for us was, did we accidentally perpetuate isolation and loneliness? So we had thought, this is the coolest thing we can do. We're rocking and rolling. We're the bees and knees. And we find out there's this giant missing part of people's lives. And we need to figure out who's going to do something about that. So we really felt like we had a responsibility. So if there's a big question around the social inclusion of people with disabilities, we encourage everybody to just honestly confront the question. So study the reality of the problem, try something different. I mean, this is any business, right? If your market changes, if the business changes, you've got to try something else and then keep at it. So let's start with studying the reality of the problem, because one of the questions we have is, why the heck is this happening anyway? And I don't have solid answers, but as someone I was the director of the organization for 11 years during this transformation that we'll tell you about today. And I knew the pressures. I knew why I kept my Medicaid day program going, and I knew why I had to do it. So the first thing is path dependence. So I don't know if you guys know this term, but essentially this is like, we get stuck in a rut, kind of like a wagon wheel rut or something like that, right? We're just stuck. We can't get out of it. A good example is the QWERTY keyboard. So you all can look at your computers and you can see QWERTY. Well, that's exactly how the first typewriters were laid out. And the reason was because the hammers would fly too fast if they were A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So typists were going so fast back in like 1850 or whenever this was invented, that they would lock up all those hammers and the typewriter would fail. So they mixed up all of the letters into the QWERTY keyboard that we know today, because there was a need to slow the typists down so the machines wouldn't fail. Well, when you get out your phone and type your next text message, see if you type too fast and the hammers fail, right? It's not relevant to today. We're stuck in a 200-year-old pattern just in our keyboards. So part of this is I inherited assumptions about how business around people with disabilities worked and how efficiency around that business worked, which brought us to our next pressure, which was this idea that our entire business model was based on billable hours, right? So I could get $7 from the state of Ohio per person per hour in Medicaid funding. Well, if I put 2 people together, that's $14 because I sure as heck couldn't pay somebody $7 an hour. Then we decided we could do 5 people in a group. And that ended up making us $35 an hour. So these business models actually are built on that kind of narrative, right? And you all know this. In some of the rooms that I was in other day programs, there would be sometimes 20 people with a disability in the room and 1 staff. So essentially they're billing $7 an hour times 20, which is $140 an hour. They were paying out probably $10 an hour for their staff, maybe 12 if it was a good job. So they're really able to make enough money to sustain their administration support in their facilities, right? So there's this financial pressure to keep the legacy kind of business model going. And then there's this thing that's probably the biggest thing that we're up against, which is unspoken historic, systemic, and cultural devaluation. So we really have studied this, and we have a whole nother set of trainings on this stuff and all this stuff, really. But people with this for them. So the day program was for them. The curriculum was for them. It wasn't individualized. People with disabilities are seen as not fully human. You know, some people are kind of, discounted. For example, going through COVID, you heard the term, well, at least it's just affecting the elderly and people with disabilities and the sick. So in a sense, they're saying, at least it's not the healthy people that we value, right? So there's a little bit of devaluation around that. A lot of people are just seen as people with disabilities as like objects of charity. So we would send out fundraising letters, please help the poor people with disabilities. And we're shaping the mind of the public the entire time as not people that want to be employed, people that want to be friends with, but people that they want to have pity for, right? Sometimes we tell stories of danger. So people with disabilities are people to be put in restraining holds or locked away, or there's going to be a great article in the Atlantic, the people we locked away. This is coming out in the September issue. The institutional history of people with disabilities. A lot of times people are seen as a burden on their family. So we have to, get them Medicaid help so that the family doesn't have to have the burden. We have a whole country, I think it's Iceland, is trying to get rid of Down syndrome genetically. And so there's this idea that people with disabilities are a burden and that we have to figure out how to alleviate that burden somehow. And sometimes it's pretty tragic. And lastly, one of the things is just people are seen as eternal children. So we were reinforcing all that, right? We at our day program were saying, oh yeah, send them to us. They'll just live in our building and we'll do the same program for everybody. It'll work. And don't worry if it doesn't end up in any good outcomes, because this is good enough. And we had all these other things that we were kind of playing into. So these things that are creating some of the pressures for why we were stuck, and we had to figure our way out of it. So we had to try another way. And that's kind of the gist of the rest of today, is we discovered this really fun, elegant, wonderful little addition to our programming that made a huge difference for us. And they were basically, we're calling them personal community projects. So we're going to give you 3 examples of ways that we did this. Some of them we still do, which is cool. And some of them we have phased out. But the first will be springing people out of our day program. The second model we'll talk about is how to catalyze community connections very close to each other, and how we did that without the day program on the second one. And the last is to empower families and neighbors. So wherever you are in your model, if you're in a group-based model, or if you're a one-on-one model, or if you're really out there in the third model, you'll find something I think that resonates with you today. So let's start with our springing out model. So again, just the title of it itself. all right? People get stuck in our services and never have an escape hatch. That's what was in our beautiful day program with our beautiful buildings, with our wonderful fleet of vans, with all of our great staff. People were in it, they were happy, they were safe, but they were stuck. There was no path out of our day program. So we started to think about, instead of our day program being a place of stickiness, how could it be a place of springing out? It's a great model, and I'll show you in a minute, because it helped us remain financially stable. We could kind of wean ourselves out of the financial model of Medicaid grouping. So it's great. It's great for day programs and workshops. Is really adds some value and opportunity to people's lives. And it's flexible. We could find people jobs and spring them out for a day, spring them out for half a day, volunteer roles, that kind of stuff. So Bridget, I'm going to let you tell about Jenny because you did this project.
Okay. So this is a photo. Jenny is there on the left in the pink with the headband on. She was a part of our day program. So, you know, rolling into our building with 80 to 100 other people with disabilities. I would have worked with her a lot in groups. Jenny in a group would get lost. She can speak, but it is a very slow cadence, not easy to understand, and probably quickly dismissed by most of us as staff, as I think speaking to you all, the choir here, on how pulled in different directions you are. The person that speaks the slowest or takes the longest, it's like, oh, catch me at lunch. Hold on, I gotta go. I can't talk right now. So Jenny would have been a little bit lost. But we, in this model, and Tim's gonna go over the numbers, but I got to spend time with Jenny just each like part of the week, one afternoon, to spend time just to get to know her better and individually. So we spent some time exploring. She loves yoga and meditation and different healing practices in that way. Part of it's tied back to her church and meditating, I think, and peace and quiet, which is interesting because our day program probably would not have been peaceful and quiet. But and we also started looking for volunteers. She had expressed interest in volunteering, and we found this local, the ladies up there, they say, "Bake Me Home." After a few attempts at finding a place that would be a fun place to volunteer, we found the right place and space and these wonderful women who Jenny got to know. And we spent our time each afternoon, one, exploring those options, trying out, meeting people, and eventually led to us create with Jenny and this woman's named Allison that runs her nonprofit. And we put together a day that was a donations-based class for yoga and tea ceremonies, Reiki healing, all these people that we met, put it together for a fundraiser for this where she'd been volunteering as on a regular basis, and got really connected with Bake Me Home.
You know, one of my favorite stories. Stacy, can we send out video links and stuff to everybody on the call? Because we do a few videos about these stories, and there's one about Jenny. And when you watch the video, it'll be captioned, and you'll be able to understand what Jenny's saying. But one of the coolest things about that video is that Allison, who's there in the brown apron, who spent every Tuesday for like 4 years with Bridget and Jenny volunteering and working on this cookie baking nonprofit, Allison doesn't have captioning, and she's in the video like responding and finishing Jenny's sentences. That's a pound of salt. That is, we have known each other every Tuesday for 5 years, and I can finish your thoughts because we know each other so well, right?
Well, just to say, the video was not after 4 years. That was just after like 1 year of some Tuesdays.
Still, I mean, like, yeah, but they even know each other better now.
Oh yeah, that's what I mean. And
point
since
being,
then, yeah, right. Just that.
Bridget, don't disagree with me on numbers here. Just kidding. It's
Your
fine.
timeline's off.
So let's get into what I think is really interesting about this. And this is a way to kind of hack your ratios. So at Starfire, we had 150 people in our day program. They were kind of staggered. So we had about 80 to 100 every single day. Okay. We staffed it at a 5-to-1 ratio, which we used at 10-to-2. So what was cool was a 10-to-2 ratio would fit in a 15-passenger van with a couple coolers. That's kind of how we designed it. It made enough money for us to be sustainable. We still did some fundraising and stuff like that, but we would take 2 staff and they'd go out to a Cincinnati Reds baseball game or to the museum, or they would go volunteer, or they'd take a picnic to a park or something like that, right? Or they would stay in our building and they would do an art class. So there'd always be 2 staff for 10 people with disabilities. So as we're thinking about how to break that up, the first step that we got to was to go back to our math class. I think probably Sister Felician taught me this in 8th grade or 7th grade, like ratios, like guess what? 10 to 2 is the same as 2 5-to-1s, right? So, and Bridget, you can correct me on this math, all right, if you want, but I think this is correct. So we have 2 groups of 5-to-1, and we thought, oh, we found it, smaller groups. And we still hear this to this day. And we got to tell you, that's not where we stopped, because what we found was when we did smaller groups, Jenny still got lost. It didn't matter if Jenny was in a group of 10 people with disabilities going to the art museum, or if she was in a group of 5 people with disabilities going to the art museum, she still got lost. And each one of their stories got kind of muddled up, and we were just doing one big compromise, right? You can't take 10 people with disabilities to Jenny's neighbor's house to bake cookies, right? If you do, you're kind of wasting Jenny's really interesting opportunity. And you can't take 5 either. And all those people are missing their opportunity too. So more math. Sister Felician said, well, guess what else? It's not just 5-to-1, 5-to-1 that equal 10 to 2, but it's also 9-to-1 and 1-to-1. So our staff were really confused because we said, okay, we're going to do smaller groups. But then we realized we'd made this big mistake. And we're like, oh, it's not about smaller groups at all. It's about one person at a time. That's where we can get super hyper personalized. And so what we did was we brought the bigger group back to the building. And we said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create an opportunity for every single person to experience a one-on-one experience every week. And that one-on-one time had some qualities about it. And this is what we told our staff. Your time with this person, you're not to go watch a movie. You're not supposed to use your money to go have coffee by yourselves. Your time with this person has to be super personalized, hopefully in their neighborhood or something that they love or care about or are good at. It has to be dignified. So you're helping them show up, dress up well for that day, and you're helping them be part of conversations. You're investing in that long story. So you're meeting people and following up with an email. So glad to meet you. Dropping flowers off at their house, right? It's intentional. It's like not just random, well, it's Tuesday, let's go have fun. Sometimes we did that just because we needed a break, right? Or somebody ghosted us. Like if you'd send an email, we'd set it up and say, hey, oh yeah, sure, Amanda's going to meet with us, but then Amanda doesn't show. Well, that's okay. Then maybe we take a break and have some fun for an afternoon. But it was always supposed to be invested and intentional. And it was opportunistic. So if something happened that was good for Jenny in the yoga world, we could flip-flop days. And instead of going out on Tuesday afternoon, Bridge could take Jenny out on Friday morning because that's when the thing happened or whenever, right? It was also creative and it was sacred. It was really important for us to honor that person's one-on-one time. This is kind of how we thought about it, is that every single week has 10 spots that fit perfectly into a day program. People arrive at 9, around 9:30, 9:45, one-on-one person hops in a car, they go out and do something interesting, they come back for lunch, they go back into the group. And then the afternoon, it flip-flops, and then every day somebody else gets. So in a group of 10 to 2 times, remember we had about 80 to 100 people, so we would have all these different staff that are taken. About 10 people would get to go out every morning, and about 10 people would get to go out every afternoon one-on-one with our staff. And there were 10 groups of 9 in the building doing something else. But what's interesting is we figured out even how to use the big groups really, really well. So what we would do is in the big groups, we'd work on logistics. So we'd start to plan people's month out. We'd use the day programming time to learn about yoga. We'd study, we'd watch yoga videos, we'd practice yoga in the building so that if Jenny was there in the day program time, she was actually investing so that when she went out on the one-on-one time, she was successful. We were helping to do social media and messaging. So when she did her yoga festival, there was a flyer that was designed in our day program that was then shared so that we could get people to Jenny's yoga festival, right? So everything that we did was one-on-one. But then the kind of behind the scenes logistics we could do in our day program. Instead of, we were doing meaningless stuff, right? We were just taking field trips and we were just doing art projects. It wasn't really meaningful, but we could do thank you notes in the group. And thank you notes would go out to everybody's personal network, people that they had met with. So it was really cool to see that we could start to spring people out. And Bridge, I mean, Jenny got a job, right?
Yeah. After that, I think the whole process and plating that, she met Allison, her family met Allison, they met other people through that event. Previous, they were not interested in a community employment. They always said no. I guess you guys would have service plan meetings. We have annual ones, right? Like, do you want a job? Are you interested? The first time I was in that meeting, they were shocked to be asked that, like, no, whoa, no way employment. And I will say, the year after this community project, the answer was, well, why wouldn't we look into that? I think they just had more evidence of people out in the community. They had references to put on a resume outside their family, including Allison, who knew a lot of people, to get a job. And she did. She's a hostess at a restaurant, locally owned restaurant.
So part of what you're seeing is an expansion of imagination. And our day program trapped everybody's imagination. The Starfire was the endpoint. Tim, Bridget, their staff are going to be the safe, happy, connected place for our kids, right? And what we were starting to get was a little bit more. Okay, but what if we tried to bring in somebody like Allison? What if they could also be safe and happy around Allison? That's an expansion of what's possible for Jenny and possible for our imagination about Jenny. And it wasn't just Jenny, like literally everybody that we worked with had that opportunity to build that. Michelle loved writing Harry Potter fan fiction. We helped her join a local women's writing circle, and she did like a writing project. They would like leave, it was so cool. They called it Write Me, I'm Yours. They would leave little blank notebooks in every cafe in Cincinnati, and they would put a prompt on it every 2 weeks. When was your first kiss? Tell us a secret that no one else knows. And people coming in for coffee would sit there and like spill their guts. And then the team would go out and collect these notebooks and read them together and then talk about the writing and all that. So they got the whole city of Cincinnati right. It was anonymous. Nobody knew anybody's secrets or first kisses, but still it was really cool for Michelle. And she was still doing that after she left our day program. Bridge, you could tell this story. I mean,
Yeah,
Candace,
so,
you helped
yep.
with her too.
Candace met up with these women. They called it the, what was it? The warriors? Like,
Yeah,
so
warrior
they did
moms.
the warrior moms, and she connected with a woman who wanted to appreciate moms and do glamorous makeovers. So she met her, and this is sort of one of their like fashion. This is the core team that were really putting together those efforts to meet up and how to celebrate those moms in different ways. But yeah.
But Candace also got a job then volunteering, a volunteer job at Dress for Success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was related to her love of fashion and related to this project as well.
Yeah, a nonprofit. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Michael, he brewed beer with a local brewery, and he ended up brewing his own batch of beer with like a team of 10 brewers. And they had this party and they sold out a whole vat of beer in one night. And Michael has been working at 2 breweries ever since. So he started in 2013 out of this project. I mean, the headmasters of the 2 breweries were part of his planning committee. They helped him come up with the beer and how to make it and all that stuff, taught all the people around him in his circle to do that. They both said, we're going to hire this guy. And he's been working at 2 breweries since 2013, which is 10 years, right? And really powerful story. We can tell it. It's so fun to tell that story because people are surprised. What? People with Down syndrome can drink beer? Yes, Michael chugs a beer before his Uber ride shows up after every shift. It's pretty impressive. Doug is someone who was really interested in working. And so I think the story goes, we would go on field trips occasionally, and part of the field trips in the day program, Doug would go to the Museum of the Contemporary Art Museum here in Cincinnati, and he would, in his Dynavox kind of iPad thing, he would type in fake tour guide kind of stuff about the modern art, which was totally hilarious. Well, then they started wondering if Doug could really be a docent or something like that. And so what they ended up doing was we knew some people down there, and they ended up hiring Doug as part of their marketing team. So Doug would attach a GoPro camera to his wheelchair, and whenever they would install a new art exhibit, Doug would go through and record the installation over time. And then they would use that footage, and he and his marketing team there would create a little welcome to the Cincinnati Art Museum. In 1 month, we're launching the blah, blah, blah exhibit, right? It would be Doug's footage, and Doug would help to create the narrative around it. So he ended up getting a job out of that. Somebody who probably was deemed unemployable by the state of Ohio. So the second, that's the model of kind of like, you know, helping people spring out. So all those people that you just saw were stuck in our day program. And all of them were going on outings and doing things that were compromises, going bowling, going shopping, going to movies. We figured that if we could just get them one-on-one time, good things would happen. So we took that one-on-one model and we did end up shutting down our day program, and we just kept that one-on-one time. So we started working just with people in their community, couple hours every single week. And this is the second model. So if you're in a day program right now and you're looking for like, how do I get some good things going? That last model we just talked about would be perfect for you, right? If you are in, say you're working at independent living supports, or if you're helping, like if you've got the ability to help people one-on-one right now, in Ohio, we have like community integration, or what's the other name for that, Bridge? Do you remember? There's like some support hours or something like that. Anyway, this is what you can do with that, some of that time. It works well with just a few hours a week. We think that a long investment over a few years provides a lot of interesting fruit, and it's kind of fun. So if you're doing traditional supports, homemaker personal care, that's what it's called in Ohio. So if you're helping somebody take care of their home or take care of their personals, getting ready for work or whatever, this is also fun to kind of sprinkle in once a week. It helps to grow connections. So again, Bridge, you tell the story. Cashel.
Okay, so this is a bit about Cashel, who you'll see here. She was never a part of our day program. I think she has said she got herself kicked out of a work employment day program that is around all over. But so our staff worked with her and tried to figure out, and we really, for her neighborhood mattered quite a bit, which is kind of something we overall think is important, right? The more local, the better. So she started investing and looking into her neighborhood, which was called Lower Price Hill. And some of the things that they started, she and the staff started, where there was something called the Neighborhood Olympics that somebody else in Cincinnati was starting. So this large group of people, and this was a citywide effort. There's 52 neighbors, and they were going to do Olympics and different challenges to one neighborhood against another, and sort of like silly field day, like beer stein holding contest. You know, these were not all athletic Olympic kind of things, but sort of fun, unique to Cincinnati. So they did this and met a wide range of people, some of whom were in their neighborhood, but a lot of the citywide. And I guess just at this point, I just kind of want to point out, we are in Cincinnati, which is a big city. And somebody talked about meeting, you know, if you're from a small town, you don't have all these options. So this, I think, for Cashel to join was really cool, to meet a lot of people, but it didn't get very deep. So I will say for Jenny and I, she and I interviewed and talked to yoga instructors versus showing up to the Paul Brown Bingle Stadium of Yoga that day. So that was an event we could attend, but we met no one because everybody was just there with their pals showing up, and here Jenny and I are like, oh, this will be awesome. Everybody loves yoga here. But it was overwhelming to us, the number of people, versus like sitting down with a yoga instructor and talking to them. So from here, the Olympics, back to Cashel, for this neighborhood Olympics, they met a wide range of people, but it was good to know people. And then getting to know Cashel better, her importance of her neighborhood and art. Through that, they met some other artist activists in her neighborhood. They started an effort around some blighted properties to get a better sense of what was out there, and really started investing in the art side, and Cashel's interest in art and the people they knew that were artists and interested in that kind of thing. And they started a group, they called it the Lower Price Hill Artist Collective. And so they started meeting on a regular basis and doing art together, and also planning other events and things, public art efforts, including a mural that they helped design and make happen called the Gallery of Neighbors that they put up. So that, I mean, and beyond this, but they did multiple, but that's a really big one that they accomplished. And they were given the art collective that Cashel was a founder of, received this award, the Visionary Award, in 2018. And that keeps going on. The artist collective and those connections still go on for Cashel. She's still got the time and space to meet with them and keep being an artist and activist in her neighborhood.
So this model was also based off the one-on-one model, right, that we talked about out of our day program. We just kept that little part of it, and we kept the same values. As you can see, Cashel's story was personalized to her. We had to be at that neighborhood level. It had to be dignified. It had to be investing in. Overall, I think we connected for and with Cashel in that model for, I think, 6 or 7 years, Bridge, is that right? And mostly once a week, right? So that time ended up being sacred. Again, to put a fine point on it, Cashel went from getting kicked out of a sheltered workshop to being the visionary of her neighborhood. And that to us is such a motivator. How many people's personal purposes are stuck because of our model? And how can we shift, grow, change, and innovate so that more people get enlivened and more people get a chance to taste life outside of that and be known by people outside of that, right? So it wasn't just Cashel. Joe loved history and he loved theater, and he ended up getting involved with historical reenactments. He loved the theater. His mom loved the theater. She took him to try out like a play, and he was supposed to like hold the flashlight for the narrator. But as soon as the lights went out, he started like shining a flashlight everywhere but on the page, and he was talking out loud at a show, which is a huge no-no in the theater, right? So we were like, well, how can we find a place where you can still be in the theater but you don't have to be quiet? And historical reenactments are perfect. So these people, so his mom, he's got his arm around his mom and his dad's right behind him, so his dad like helps like refurbish knives and old guns from like the, I don't know, 1780s or something. But on his other side are descendants of some of the founding members of the family that founded the city of Cincinnati. And he was adopted as an honorary member of their family because every year, and he's going to do it again this year, every year he helps recreate the story of the founders of Cincinnati's city. And he volunteers at Heritage Village, which is a historical reenactment site just north of the city. And he's been doing that for over 10 years. Again, someone who is deemed unemployable by the state of Ohio. And he even did get a job for a while till COVID kind of shut that down, right? He did a great job connecting. Sam, Bridge, I mean, like, tell the story. You helped Sam.
Yeah.
You helped Joe too.
Yeah. So Sam, she was in our day program. I knew her very well, but she had an interest. She could working with her hands. And so we really, this is a local sewing shop. So beyond just craftiness, but sort of got into sewing and machine sewing, took lessons at the local shop. Terry is the shop owner. She's in the top left in the tank top, and then the right larger picture. And Sam just loved it. We took lessons, and they had an open sewing that they and then the project that we came up with was opens during like Terry let us use the shop, and people could come to volunteer to sew things for babies. So those are burp cloths and bibs that people came together. Different women on Friday afternoons would come together and sew these things and hang out. And Sam's aunt would make fancy cookies to snack on. And then from there, they suggested she join a quilt guild where some of the women were already there, that she knew people walking in. Instead of being the stranger in the back of the room, there were already 3 people in the guild, which meets monthly to say, Sam's here. Oh my gosh, you've got to meet Sam. She had this great thing. We got together and we sewed these projects, and she's still sewing with the shop still. Years later.
This is Telly. He volunteered at a soup kitchen in his neighborhood. This was a huge lesson for us. Again, we'll send out a video, but Telly, we would take groups of people with disabilities to volunteer with Telly at a food pantry in his own neighborhood. And what we learned was so powerful and so valuable. It was a big mistake. When we walked in, people would say, "Hi, Starfire." So we would walk into Telly's neighborhood, and people would call us all Starfire. And I think that was such an important lesson. Again, we are missing people's identities. They don't get to be their own name because it's Starfire showing up, right? And we realized we're taking the value that Telly could be having. So we started working with him just in this connecting model, a little bit a week. And for example, I mean, Telly doesn't talk, but he loves this group of people. He doesn't sew, but our staff helped him pick out colors for aprons for everybody who worked at the food pantry. And those people loved it, right? And Telly did also get a job eventually. which was another person who was deemed unemployable by the state of Ohio that we found a job for, right? So a lot of these things are interesting, is that the more that people get imagination built up and they get networks and they get experience and confidence and people start to believe in them and they have a story that is employable, things happen. This is Craig. He did a science festival. We call it Science-Cincinnati. So again, this is fun, right? Like whoever has a science festival. Well, Craig did. And he had, I think it was like 60 people showed up to talk about cool science things in Cincinnati. It was just a Saturday afternoon, right? And all these interesting people that he could network with and again, put on his resume or say that I have this experience around designing a science festival. So this is probably our most outside the box concept. This is where things start to get really fun and really interesting. So we're enlivened by these stories, right? Like Jenny's doing awesome stuff and Cashel is thriving and Telly and, Michael with his beer. And we're like, how do we get more of this stuff? Because the problem for us was that we had to start when people were like out of high school, when they were like in their 20s and 30s. That's when we're starting to work on these stories. And we're like, we're already 20 years too late. So we started to wonder, how would we start building things like this before people were already in a hole that was dug out for 20 years? And so what we did was we played this. I was the director and I'm like, okay, so here's my problem. Every time I hire somebody, they stay for about 2 years and they leave. They're awesome. I interview them, I train them, Bridget trains them. They're totally cool, but they still leave. They take all of our knowledge and our value and they leave. So I'm so sad about that. But they also are leaving kind of like a void in the lives of the people they're connecting for, right? Because a lot of times it's them driving some of the action. So we're trying to figure out, well, how does the value stay with the person? So it was in 2017, we said, all right, this wonderful guy, Steve, was working for us. It's not his real name, just giving it to you. But let's say Steve, he puts in his resignation. He's going to move to Florida, hang out with his family. All right, see you, Steve. Good luck. Best of luck. Thanks for your good work here. I said, instead of hiring new Steve, let's divide Steve's salary up amongst families of children with disabilities. And let's teach him how to do the same projects we do. So that's what we ended up doing. We gave 10 families a couple $1,000. And we said, we're going to pay you to do a project in your neighborhood. You get to drive the entire project. Every single month, you get to meet with like me for coffee or Bridget or somebody else who has done this before. And we're going to invest in you understanding the values of inclusion for your child, the strategies for connecting for community members, how to teach them how to interview people and do all this cool stuff that we were doing. And in particular, we were interested in this we were interested in scale. So we're like, well, there's two ways to think about scale. Is you can think about like, how do we become McDonald's or something in franchise? You can also think about scale over a lifetime. And we were interested in, what if a family from the day their child was born was thinking about community and building social networks? And wouldn't that be wonderful to scale over a person with a disability's lifetime so that they can continue to kind of hold that thread? Not that it's the only thing. We think services, therapies, all that stuff's still important, but there is also a community trail, right, that we can follow. So anyway, we would teach the families all this. And this is the last part. So far, what we've told you about are two, what we call service innovations. We are innovating our service. And I'll also say this. When we think about, Stacey and I were talking about this in an earlier call, we were talking about the difference between transformation and innovation. So transformation can be scary. And I always hear people say, oh, we're looking for system and organization transformation. I did that. I did transformation. It's really hard. And it's hard to think about because at the front of it, you're like, transform into what? What do we become? A better way to think about this is innovation. How do you try some new things out, just tiny bits at a time? And that way you kind of start to get confidence and you grow. You start with one person, you're like, oh, what if we did 2? What if we did 4? What if we did 10? And then you start to be like, oh my gosh, well, it worked for this person. I'll bet it worked for that person. How would it look different? So innovation is a little bit more of a manageable way to think about change, if that's your bag, right? So what we were looking for here was not service innovation. We were looking for what we call social innovation. We're looking for a new way that the general public can interact, connect with, and know a person with a disability. So inherently, remember back when I said like there's three things, it's like we're stuck in our rut, we're stuck in the money, but we're also stuck in society's views of people with disabilities. And we were trying to figure out how can we change that? And the biggest thing we can do is get people to stop thinking about it as being Starfire's responsibility and start thinking about it as being their potential opportunity to know one person with a disability in their neighborhood or in their faith community or in their, workplace or something like that. So this was totally innovating around social connection, and we were helping families learn how to lead that. So Bridge, you can tell the story of Carol and Grayson.
So this is Carol and Grayson. Carol is leaning on Grayson's wheelchair there. That's the mom that was brave enough to say yes to trying a community project. And Grayson, and a few things, if Carol were here and could share some of the things she shared before that I have found most kind of really stuck with me, is one of the things that we were teaching on or talking about was really looking at within your family, within each of you, what are your gifts and what do you have, what do you really want to focus on? And she has shared that so she has two other kids in that picture, and she was like, oh my gosh, she's like, I could rattle off what they like to do and what they want to do. Grayson, she was like, I really didn't know the answer to that question. And that kind of was a gut check for herself, and for how she was really, all her focus was on care, and for good reason, taking care of her son. But she was really shocked that she didn't have an answer for that. So she leaned into that. And she and her daughters and Grayson came up with the idea that they would sew and decided they wanted to learn to sew together. Grayson's not going to learn to sew, but he loves being at the park. He loves being outside. He loves being around people. So they decided to do sewing. They called it Sew and Play. And they put together, Carol went on a quest to find some people who knew how to sew. Turns out one of her good friends already knew and said, oh yeah, I'll come and I'll help you. I'll teach you. So they did this monthly over the summer. Once a month, and just kind of had some other learnings around life, and thinking about how they introduced Grayson by his diagnosis versus starting just to introduce him and be together as a family, and playing at the park. From that and the energy that was given, so I think another hesitation sometimes is families are exhausted and they already have so much on their plate. Carol did this project. One, she may have been like, oh man, can I take this on? She did it. From there, her whole family, they were so energized. They all loved it. They all got different things out of it. They would each have a different version of the story. But they haven't stopped. From there, the neighborhood group, they knew she would do something. So somebody's like, hey, I've got pumpkins. What do you want to do? They end up doing a pumpkin painting. They've done an outdoor movie night. And these are all above and beyond the project that she did with Starfire, but it just became such a good together thing for her and her family to do that she started investing more time in these community events in her neighborhood versus driving the half hour to the Miracle League adapted baseball league, right? So her time, she started investing locally and hasn't stopped. She and her oldest are on boards, I think, of neighborhoods now. Like just again, the how it has grown from just one event over a summer to this.
So we gave, over the course of the last few years, we've given, I think, 60 families project budgets. Each one gets at least $1,000. A couple families have spent zero. They say, oh, we can do this without any money. And they do. They get a mentor. About 12 of the families, Carol's one of them, have stepped into mentorship, and now they mentor other families. So we work now with families in Massachusetts. We work with families in Colorado and Indiana. We work with family groups in Kentucky. We're working with some families just all over the place. And they get to mentored by other families who've done it. The family gets to be independent from us. So we really are leaning into some really interesting, fun things to play with, which is like saying, like, look, if you don't want your story told a certain way, that's fine. Tell us. So for example, there are families who say, don't use my kid's image. There are other families that say, yes, let's make a video about our project. It's really up to the family. And we give them equity. We're like, well, if we're going to pay our staff, we got to pay families. So we give them like $250 at the beginning. We give them $250 at the end to wrap it up. We get to trust them to do the project on their own. And now we're starting to play around with, well, what if somebody doesn't have a family necessarily? Or what if we could really ask neighbors to do this? So we've just launched a few projects where neighbors are getting the money to lead a project in collaboration with their neighbor with a disability. And the family can or cannot be a part of that. It's up to them. But we've done a ton of really cool projects around this. One family in Pennsylvania did a hip hop, National Hip Hop Day, which is in August. I think it's coming up. And then they did a second project where they did like affirmation boards that they hung around their neighborhood during COVID, just to kind of like strengthen people's resolve. And they've started doing like all kinds of cool dancing. They're in a swing dance club now, but their son, Vineet, is part of all of that. This family, their son is autistic. He can hear and identify 400 different bird calls. He also does the typing, RPM typing to communicate. And he talks, and for a long time, they didn't know that Kyle could speak or could think about these things. So he's kind of that emerging story around autism of there's some underlying intelligence that we're missing. So Kyle, who can discern 400 different bird calls, his family hosted a Audubon Society retreat weekend. And they counted up, was it the Martins Bridge, the Purple Martins or something like that, I think? I don't remember. But it's some kind of bird nerd thing, you know, and like they all just counted up these, and they go on citizen science and bird counts over the winter. So he does art with some of the bird people, and they do bird related art. But again, kind of these stories that are living outside of Starfire, but we help them learn how to do it. And then the family gets to own it. Right. So the Melnick family hosted a monthly pop-up dog party. So every month in their neighborhood, they block off this little park with some fencing, and they sell some beer and wine, and people bring like 100 dogs, and they've gotten so connected to their community, and their neighbors help them carry it out and lead the thing. This family, if you're in a rural community, like this stuff totally works. This family lives in a very rural part of Ohio, just northeast of Cincinnati, and they have 10 acres. And they're like, what do we do in the country? I'm like, what do you want to do? They're like, what if we planted Christmas trees? And every year people could come decorate it. And then after 7 years, they could cut it down and take it home. I'm like, totally fine. So they use their money to do that. And they had like 30 people show up and adopt a Christmas tree and planted them together. And they've had like year 1, year 2, right? So you keep building on that. This family decided to host a bicycle obstacle course in honor of Major Taylor, who was the first Black world champion cyclist. And there's a Major Taylor Society in like every major city. So there's one in Cincinnati. And so this family went to like, they went to like Goodwill or some, you know, place, and they bought all these bikes that were broken, and they used the money to hire a bike repair people to fix them. And then they handed out bikes to the kids in the neighborhood, and then taught them bike safety and how to fix your bike. And then everybody who showed up got a free bike, right? So it's a really cool way for a family to start to think about, how do we create outcomes for our family? So these are where we get to outcomes. This is how we think about it. What are we looking for? We're looking for 3 big things in all these. You've already seen them. We're looking for identity beyond disability. We're going to talk about that in a second. We're looking for connections. And notice, I did not say relationships. We used to say we're looking for relationships. And then Carol, when she started doing her family project, she said, hold on a second. You're not responsible for my relationships. She said, but Starfire can help with connections. And then the people, me, my son, my kids, and our neighbors, we can build the relationships. So it's really humbling for us to understand our goal was not to build relationships. Our goal was to build connections and to foster connection and to help deepen connection. But we weren't necessarily responsible for a relationship. If it happened, awesome. And we could think about it, but we're responsible for it. And then we're going to talk about this too, which is my favorite thing to talk about, which is we discovered that disability wasn't even the problem. It's culture. And if culture is the problem, then we have new colleagues in our work. And people with disabilities and their families and their neighbors are our colleagues in healing a better culture. So let's start with identity real quickly. We're looking to expand identity, inclusive of disability, but beyond disability, right? So we're looking for how many aspects of your identity can we unlock, explore, and showcase. And this is, notice we say disability oriented, because we think that parents have a disability oriented identity sometimes, right? They're stuck in that model. I'm here as the disability family. And parents will say that. We used to be the disability family. Now we're the family that helps the neighborhood plan the neighborhood bike ride. We're the family that does the cool art stuff, right? We're the family that does so it becomes a family identity. But we also think that neighbors are in a disability oriented identity. We're stuck thinking about our neighbors with disabilities as people to send to Starfire, right? So we've got to help everybody step outside of that identity and start to build a shared identity around birds, around sewing, around volunteering to get more food in the hands of our neighbors, right? So you're always looking to explore. Where can we look, especially local? Look for clues as to who people are. You know, like Carol says, Grayson doesn't talk. He doesn't tell me what he loves, but I know he lights up around music. So she made sure there was always music when they were sewing together, right? We don't know that Telly loves to help with food until we go to a food pantry. He can't tell us, but all of a sudden he lights up and he's helping out and he's working hard. Nobody would have ever thought that about him before that, right? So we're always looking for clues, what lights people up. And to Bridget's point around Cashel and the neighborhood Olympics, maybe it's not even yours or the person's. Maybe it's just something cool going on in the neighborhood and you can find a little part to support other people's dreams and other people's. And then that can be part of your identity, right? We're always looking for more. We're looking for connections and we are looking for as many as possible. And here's why. Remember when I said there's only 2 friends without a disability and 3 other citizens without a disability at an average in people's lives? We're not looking for friends. What we're looking for is other citizens. We are looking to have as many people without disabilities in the life of a person with a disability. That raises probabilities so that eventually some of those people are going to stick with it. If you put 100 people in your life and you said, how many people are going to be here in 25 years? It might only be 1 or 2, but we got to start with 100 to get to 1 or 2. Right? So that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to raise the amount of people that are in the lives or connected, or at least starting a little story. We always talk with Carol and the families about what if you could add 1 more person to your life every single year for the rest of your life? That'd be pretty cool. That's enough, right? We saw it as a treasure hunt. So we really follow John McKnight and Peter Block. Peter Block lives here in Cincinnati. He's an organizational design guy. And John McKnight out of Chicago, asset-based community development, he's written a few books with Peter Block. So he's always in Cincinnati and we get to hang out with him. And so he taught us how to interview in neighborhoods. You're looking for talents and interests and passions and skills. So you can just start. So we would teach our staff, we'd say, go out with this person with a disability, go in their neighborhood and interview their neighbors. What are you interested in? What do you care about? What could you teach kids? Why were you born? And what you're looking to do is affirm everybody, but also to see if there's any matches with the person that you're supporting. And we say, this is kind of like the gifts of the hands, head, and heart. It's another way to think about it. What can you do that you know? What can you do with your hands? And what do you care about? So even sometimes we found people that were, say, I don't know, trying to escape from domestic abuse. That's a gift of the heart. Can you help other people, around that kind of hurt? We knew a person with a disability who was in jail. We helped connect them to someone who had been in jail and had turned their life around. That's not a traditional connection, but that's a beautiful, critical connection. If I'm in jail and I need to turn my life around, I could use somebody who also has that story to teach me how to do it. And they've been in each other's lives for 12 years now, right? So this is a huge treasure hunt and it's so much fun to find those connections. And the last part, like I said, is my favorite. What's in need of fixing? It ain't disability. It's our culture. We need a better culture, and it has to be done personally around each person. We can't just magic our way into a better culture. I wish we could, but we don't have that power. Instead, we have to slowly build the culture around people, and we need new colleagues. We used to think our colleagues were just the people on our payroll, but actually our colleagues are each Telly's our colleague. Carol's our colleague. Grayson's our colleague. Jenny's our colleague. Her neighbor is our colleague, right? All of her yoga friends are our colleagues. So we have this saying, the only real cure for a bad culture is the creation of a better culture. So Bridge, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so I think, like Tim's saying, the culture is we have some issues within our culture, and we all are in need of healing. And what does that look like? And I'm sure you guys, we're going to go pretty fast here, but there is a lot of trauma out there that's impacting the people we work with disabilities, as well as ourselves, our staff. So what are we going to do about that? So I think I'm going to assume you guys know quite a bit about trauma at this point and adverse childhood experiences, but they're out there. There's so much, and we know that those have impacts at a young age because of the development. And there's also the risk factors that come with being an adult and just living life. And there's a list of traumatizing adult experiences similar to those ACE, but it's a little longer list. But one of the realities of that is that there is the birth of a child with a disability being a traumatizing event. Seeing that and knowing that, one, you just have to acknowledge it. I wanted to cross it out and be like, that's not true. But that would be denying what's really going on in our culture and in people's lives. And we want to get to a point where we celebrate every child's birth, right? Like every birth should be exciting and welcoming. The big factors throughout all the trauma and all those experiences is the shame. And the place that people feel that they deserve this, and the shame that goes with it, and how that is an isolating event. And therefore it's this wicked cycle of, I deserve it, I don't belong, I'm not loved, I'm not lovable, and that we've got to break out of that. And we see some inward and outward violence, when that happens and when people have experienced that, and how they treat themselves or how they treat other people in ways to deal with it. So if we're going to heal that trauma, if we're going to heal that shame, there's certain things that we know are the resiliency factors, and those are being together. So showing up and being around other people, in ways that recognizes that I have gifts and that I am welcome and I am meant to be here, as well as orienting towards the gifts of the other people in those groups. So within those projects, who is it? Sandy knows how to sew. Somebody else knows how to decorate a table, or somebody's got paint, right? So how can everybody come and share those gifts? Invest in rhythms of time and space. So the idea that being somewhere on a regular basis really helps us, and knowing what to expect and getting together on a regular basis is going to heal ourselves. And the other thing is sensory rich. So the more impact in our brain waves and neurons and neural pathways, the more senses that are engaged, the better off, the more healing that comes. So one of the people we've talked about loves to draw. The difference between drawing in your room by yourself, sure, that's great. What if you could meet up with a group of people outside at a park and sketch and draw together with food, with music, right? So what's the difference in that, and how much more impact would it have on him for healing? And we talked before about affirmations. So the more that we can tell people that they're doing good and appreciate their gifts and what they're bringing, the more healing that'll happen.
So as you think about those resiliency factors and how we help people heal from the isolation and disability, the idea that people are ashamed to have a child, or shamed for having a child whose body and mind is different, or people who are shamed for being born with a body or mind that is different, and then maybe socially shunned. And at Starfire, we were a band-aid for that problem, right? And we realized that we could actually be a place that helped people heal through yoga, through baking together, through planning neighborhood parties and highlighting the artists of the neighborhood and doing creative things together, through sewing together and celebrating culture and holidays together, people that wrote together, planned fancy fashion shows together, brewed beer together, made cool videos together. People who historically reenacted in sweaty costumes together, people who sewed and quilted together, people who volunteered to hand out food, people who studied science together, people who celebrated Hip Hop Day or studied birds or hosted dog parties or planted trees or rode bicycles together. These are the things that we think are healing. And this was the most exciting aspect of our transformation that started with innovation, is that we got to be a part of healing the world. Just one person, one family, one neighborhood at a time. So we want to give it back to you. We know some of you have been studying pretty deeply the community life engagement guideposts, which are super cool and relevant. And we remember kind of getting involved with this early in the day. We just like to get you in small groups and have you talk about and make some sense. So Bridget's going to put this in the chat box, but you're thinking about, how does what you've just heard from Starfire relate to these 4 guideposts? Individualizing supports for each person, promote membership and contribution, use human and social capital, decrease dependence on paid supports, and provide supports that are outcome-oriented and regularly monitored. Okay, so have fun.
Tim, before you do
Mhm.
that, I wonder, because we're just about towards the end of the webinar, I wonder if we have the ability to take some questions.
Sure.
Before we close out, I just want to make sure people that had this on their calendar until 12:30 are able to kind of engage in some question and answers before we end. And maybe if people still want to stay on for small groups, we can do that as well.
Yeah, we can do that.
Just want to make sure people have an opportunity to either unmute and ask questions, or feel free to type in the chat box. And got some great feedback from Beth. This training's been absolutely phenomenal. Thanks so much. I hope I can learn more from you in the future. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, Beth.
Tim and Bridget, thank you. I would mirror Beth's comments. This has been amazing. Quick question on your staff and the culture as you started with that springboarding. Can you talk about any of the maybe learning lessons or advice you would have in what worked well or what didn't, just insofar as how you work with your existing workforce in the process?
Totally. Here's what I can tell you. At first, I thought we should hire one person to do the connecting. And then I thought maybe everybody should do some of the connecting. The answer really is that everybody gets the chance. Some people are going to be really great at it, like Bridget. Some people are not. They are designed to be in the command control, right? And so some of those people phased themselves out graciously. Some of those people got mad at us. So the thing I can tell you is the more stories that we got, the more people who wanted to be part of it jumped in and got to be part of it. So we would have staff that said, Telly's, he's unincludable. There's no way. There's no way. There's a lot of reasons he will never be included. 3 staff told me that. Danietta, our colleague, said, I think we can do it. And she made it happen for 7 years. So it really is about the gumption and the disposition of the staff, right? So we stopped hiring based off of like social work and special ed degrees, and we started hiring based off dispositions. We were looking for artists, community people, people that had a disposition toward exploration, creativity, networking. So if you look up things like dispositional interviewing questions, you're going to find really great stuff, and we can send some to you, but like they help you filter for what are people's dispositions versus their skills. Because a lot of the skills our special ed and social work stuff teach us is like command, compliance, control. And it ends up not serving this separate thing, which is like connecting and helping people get to know each other. So that's a great question. I think another thing is just like, I'll share this real quick, but we have 2 things that we kind of post, which are, this is almost like a visual version of our job description. So we use Bridget's, remember Bridget just showed you the resiliency factors as we understand them: be together, orient toward gifts, invest in rhythms. Well, then we combine those with John O'Brien's work around the 9 sectors of community life, and we added 1, social justice. But you can actually start to wonder about how can you be together in a faith community? How can you orient toward gifts in a faith community? How can you invest in rhythms in a faith community? How can you create sensory rich memories in a faith community? You can do that with creative expression and art. You can do that with your community and neighborhood. You can do that with work. We helped Michael, who did the beer. He did a project after he got hired where he had Battle of the Breweries, and they had like a pinball battle, and they even like the two breweries created like a shared trophy out of old Nintendo and Sega parts, and they spray painted it gold, and they like transfer that back and forth to each brewery, and Michael's on that committee, right? So these breweries every year have this pinball battle. Well, that was a project we did for Michael to help him get social juice at work, right? So this is how we teach our staff to invest their time. And we're like, you can use any slice of this pie and work on it the next time you leave. The other thing, and this is like what we help with families, is we came up with what we call the 4 commitments for community building. And this is just a way of saying, look, it's really tempting to go back to special needs art. It's really tempting to go back to Starfire's day program. It's really tempting to go back to the thing that's always welcoming us. It's very scary to step into new territory. So when families came into this, we're like, okay, we got to figure out how to get some guardrails for these. So we said, look, this isn't about your whole life. This is just about this project for 6 months. We want you to focus on gifts, not problems. We want you to focus on your neighborhood, not a special needs community. We want you to focus on connections for you, not hiring service workers. We want you to focus on joy, not a parent support group of commiseration, because that points the finger of sadness at your child versus at the culture that's hurting, right? So we asked families to make these 4 commitments, and then we asked our staff to do the same thing. We're like, just don't recreate the service. We got plenty of that. It's billions of dollars of industry, right? It's got all the money in the world. So community just needs us to carve out that special sacred time that we kind of start to design around. So that was helpful for our staff too. Sorry, hope that answered something. Bridget, do you have anything to add to that staff-wise?
No, I mean, just to say, I think I was a day program staff that was probably pretty hesitant to go out in the community. Like, this is a big change, and it took some time and some effort. And I think, to your point, Tim, just to have one person do it lets all of us think we can't do it. And that's what we think, right? Like our own insecurities versus if everybody gets a chance to step out there and try it and get some wins, you know, whether they're a forever win or just a good day, you know. And I think that's also something to keep in mind, like how we rate success. You know, not every story we have is still happening. Not every Joe's history event is one that's continued on. There are other events that were a one-time only. And I think that's not to say it wasn't successful. It still happened. You know.
Tim and Bridget, I have a quick question. I wonder if you could speak for a second about people that you support that perhaps either don't have families or maybe have families that either are unable or maybe unwilling to get involved in this way. Can you describe a little how you've approached that?
Yeah, so one is in our day program. What's nice about the day program, again, we shut down our day program, just to say. But what's nice about it is between 9 and 3, you basically have carte blanche to do whatever you want. Families don't care in some senses. They're like, well, just keep them safe, right? So we would do our projects, and sometimes the projects had to live in the hours of the day program. Right. So if there was one woman whose parents just weren't on board. They're like, it's not safe. It's not safe. So we did a little thing around kindness projects, like where we would leave kindness notes or drop off flowers or stuff like that. It was always in the construct of the day program. And we just couldn't get around that. But that's part of why we decided to go with the family work, because we realized families were kind of seduced by our model that we were the end point of their child's social life. So we're like, well, we got to start a new story with a new generation, because otherwise we'll be stuck in this for 20 more years. So, what's cool about that is the more that families get on board, the other families, they start to talk to each other. You know how it is, right? And they're like, oh, you should do it too. And all of a sudden we've got families like busting down our door. We want to do projects too. So we wish we had more money to give out, but we deal about 10 projects a year for families. And then we do projects depending on our capacity in other states. If they get the funding and bring it to us, we're like, yeah, if you fund it, we'll help. So
I have one more question here, and I know we're at the end of our time together. This is a question from our colleague, With MTI, how is competitive integrated employment encouraged, prioritized, and delivered in the lives of individuals receiving Starfire supports?
Well, we really believe that jobs are critical. We did have a really robust jobs plan. We had 100% placement, which was like state of Ohio was like, we were their golden children, but we had that because we had networking. So we're big fans of like Griffin Hammis. I knew Dave Hammis. He lives about 40 minutes from us, and I'd have coffee with him. We really believe that people deserved a chance to be employed. And we found people, like I said, I gave you examples. We found people jobs who the state of Ohio literally assessed and deemed unemployable. And in our mind, that was because that an assessment didn't capture what was possible when we added in community connection networks and what we consider affection. So, we want to get to a place where people say, like they did with Michael, we've been brewing beer with him for 6 months. We think he's pretty cool. What could we do about this guy next? What's he going to do next? And we say, well, we don't know. And they say, well, let's hire him. And we say, sounds great. So we really believe in building in the imagination and the connection in the community first. So, and we tell that to parents too. We're like, listen, your kid's going to need a job one day. The thicker your network is, the thicker their network's going to be.
Tim, this is Kurt Mangan from Phase Industries. I have a question about, you mentioned with those family projects, you've said you're paying your staff, so why not pay the family members? What, from a financial feasibility, logistical approach, was any of that project management time from an administrative position billable, or was there any, I know you would give them a budget to work with, but was there any, how did you do that? Or if there was a way to do that?
Yeah, we just fundraised for it
Okay.
because we were able to, but to be honest with you, that is a huge question for us. We went to our local in Cincinnati, Hamilton County, we have the county board system, and their EI budget is like $3 million a year. And we went to them and we're like, hey, what if you just peeled off like 10%, 1%, like if you could just give us $30,000, we could help like 15 families do something different when their kids are 0 to 3, right? And you would have thought we were asking them to, I don't know, it's like overthrow the government or something. Like they were like, what are you talking about? Like that just did not compute for them. So, but I do believe that in big I legislation, it'd be pretty cool to see if anybody on this call is like at the state level. Let's get something carved out for a few families to do some cool projects, because our data shows that okay, it's just us chickens. We're still recording it so people will hear. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to reframe family expectations from a very young age. We're essentially trying to radicalize them and say, you've got to want community as much as we do. Otherwise, if you delegate community to the service system, they're just going to let you down because they're just like us and they're just moving on and taking new jobs, which is fine, but it's going to be disappointing. So we have to teach families to really focus on how to invest. And that means we got to give them cash and money. Now, foundations love this stuff, right? Like local foundations we go to, be like, oh, we're helping families think about how to become independent of the system. They're like, yes, please take my money, right? You could do that, whatever is local foundations in Minnesota or in Minneapolis, St. Paul, whatever, they will love to invest in something like that as a pilot project.
Sure.
I also want to
But yeah, that'd be awesome.
draw attention that Bridget has put a survey link in the chat box if people are able to grab it, and I'm sure they would appreciate very much if you all were able to complete that. We can also include it in the follow-up email that will have all the resources. And Tim and Bridget, thank you both. This was amazing. I can see a lot of very happy faces with the information that you all have shared, and we look forward to getting your additional videos that we can also send out to the group or for anyone that registered today. Thank you so much. We appreciate this.
Yeah, It's an
Thank
honor.
you.
It's a joy. Thank you all for your good work. Keep at it too. Like if nobody tells you today or this week or this year, you're doing good work and we need it.
We appreciate you. Thank you to everybody that participated and hung on as long as you did. Thanks so much.